Walked into my house carrying a leather briefcase, wearing a smile I didn't trust. That was the moment I knew. Not the first time my son-in-law had made me uncomfortable, not the first time I'd caught him looking at my bookshelves the way some people look at price tags. But that morning, standing in my own living room, watching him set that briefcase on my coffee table like he owned the place, that was the moment I stopped pretending I didn't see what was happening. Let me back up. My name is June. I'm 67 years old. I live alone in the house my husband Gerald and I bought in 1991, a four-bedroom colonial in Fairfax County, Virginia, with a yard big enough for the grandchildren I keep hoping for, and a kitchen I spent 30 years making feel like the center of the world. Gerald passed 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the last morning I held his hand. That kind of loss doesn't leave you. It settles into the walls of your house, into the smell of the sheets, into the way the silence sounds different at 2 in the morning than it ever did before. Gerald was a careful man, methodical. He spent 30 years as a civil engineer, and he brought that same precision to everything, including the way he structured what we built together. The year before he got sick, a colleague of his had gone through an ugly divorce. The man's wife had claimed half of everything, including property he'd owned before the marriage, because it was all titled in his personal name. Gerald came home from that situation shaken. He sat me down at the kitchen table and told me we needed to talk to an attorney. We spent 6 months reorganizing. The house, the rental property we owned in Manassas, and the brokerage accounts were placed into a revocable living trust, the Gerald and June Whitmore Family Trust. Gerald was the primary trustee. When he passed, I became sole trustee. The assets technically belonged to the trust, not to me personally. Gerald explained it to me carefully. He said, if anyone ever comes looking at what's yours, they're going to find a locked door. I didn't know how right he was going to be. My daughter Pamela is 41. She's smart, kind-hearted, and has a weakness for men who talk too loud and too fast. She met her husband at a conference in Atlanta 7 years ago. He's 44, works in financial consulting, or he says he does, and his name is Derek. From the beginning, Derek had a way of making every conversation about money. Not obviously, he was too smooth for that, but if you paid attention, you'd notice he'd ask about the neighborhood in a way that was really asking about property values. He'd compliment the kitchen renovation in a way that was really asking what it cost. He'd mention casually that real estate in Northern Virginia was really something, wasn't it? That prices had really appreciated, hadn't they? I paid attention. For the first 2 years, I told myself I was being uncharitable. Pamela loved him. He was good to her on the surface. Attentive, thoughtful, with gifts. The kind of husband who posts photos on Instagram with captions about his amazing wife. My friends thought he was charming. My sister told me I was too hard on him. So I kept my mouth shut, and I watched. The shift started about 18 months after they got married. It started small. A comment at Thanksgiving about how this house was too much for one person to manage. A suggestion, framed as concern, that I might want to start thinking about the next chapter. I smiled and changed the subject. Then Pamela started calling more, which I loved. I missed my daughter. But the calls had a new texture to them. She'd ask about my health with a weight behind, the questions that felt less like love and more like inventory. Are you sleeping okay? Are you keeping up with the yard? Have you been to the doctor lately? I answered honestly. I told her I was fine. I was fine. The first concrete suggestion came last spring. Derek had done some research. He told me this himself, proud of it, and found a senior living community in Loudoun County. New construction, he said. Independent living units. Beautiful amenities. He sent me a brochure by email with a subject line that said, something worth looking into, June. Yeah. I opened it. I read it. The cheapest unit was $3,400 a month. I did not respond. 2 weeks later, Pamela brought it up over dinner. She said Derek thought it might be good for me to have a community around me. She said the drive from their place in Herndon was getting long. She said she worried about me being alone. Her voice was gentle, and her eyes were soft, and I looked at my daughter and felt something close, something I could not name. I said I'd think about it. I was not going to think about it. But I didn't say that because I wanted to understand how far this was going to go before I said anything at all. I started paying closer attention after that. To the questions Derek asked when he came over. to what he looked at, what he lingered on. He once stood in front of the built-in bookshelves in the study for a long moment. Gerald had designed those himself and said almost to himself, "This room alone must be worth something." I asked him what he meant. He laughed it off, said he just meant the craftsmanship. I called my attorney the following Monday. Her name is Margaret Chin. She'd handled the trust paperwork years ago and kept in touch every couple of years to update documents when the law changed. I walked her through what had been happening. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "June, you're smart to be paying attention. Let me explain something to you about what you actually own and what that means if anyone were to ever try to make a move." She explained that because everything was in the trust, none of it was technically in my individual name. There was no real property, no brokerage account, no significant asset that appeared under June Whitmore personally. From a legal standpoint, the trust owned those things. I was trustee, which meant I controlled them completely, but they weren't mine in the way a predatory claim would need them to be. "What about power of attorney?" I asked. "Or some kind of conservatorship proceeding?" She explained that both of those mechanisms work against an individual's personal assets and personal legal capacity. If someone were to try to get power of attorney over me or initiate a conservatorship, they would need to demonstrate I was incapacitated. And even then, a trustee role is a separate legal capacity, not automatically affected by personal POA or guardianship. I sat with that for a while. Then I asked, "What should I do?" She said, "Nothing. You don't have to do anything. Just let them show you their hand." I went home and I made a pot of coffee and I sat in Gerald's old chair by the window and I thought about what he would have said. He was not a suspicious man by nature, but he was a prepared one. He always said that preparation wasn't distrust, it was respect for reality. He used to say, "You hope for the best, you build for everything else." I thought, "Gerald, you built well." The briefcase arrived on a Tuesday in October. Derek called me the Sunday before and said he and Pamela wanted to come by to talk about something important. His voice had a careful quality to it, measured, the way people sound when they've rehearsed. I said, "Of course, come by Tuesday morning, I'll make coffee." I did not sleep well Monday night. Not because I was afraid. I want to be clear about that. I didn't sleep because I was thinking. I was running through every possible version of what Tuesday might look like. I was making sure I was ready. They arrived at 9:30. Pamela hugged me at the door and held on a little longer than usual, which told me she wasn't entirely comfortable with what was about to happen. Derek came in behind her, that briefcase in his hand, and he set it on my coffee table before he even sat down. With him was another man, introduced as a colleague. Said his name was Paul. He had the specific kind of professional smile that people practice. He was wearing a tie on a Tuesday morning, which, in my experience, means someone wants to be taken seriously. I offered them coffee. Derek said they were fine. I poured myself a cup anyway and sat down across from them. Derek started talking. He talked for a while. He said that he and Pamela had been doing a lot of thinking. He said they were worried about me. He said that managing a property this size at my age alone was a significant burden. He said the financial landscape was complicated, and they thought it might benefit everyone if there was a more organized approach to how my affairs were managed. He talked about how he'd been consulting with some colleagues. He gestured to Paul, who specialized in estate management and elder financial planning. He said they wanted to help me set up a durable power of attorney, naming Pamela as my agent, so that if anything ever happened, she could manage my affairs seamlessly. He said it was just the responsible thing to do. He said all of this very calmly, very carefully, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. I listened to all of it. I didn't interrupt. I held my coffee cup with both hands, and I listened. When he finished, I said, "I appreciate that you've put thought into this." He nodded. Paul nodded. I said, "I do want to understand the scope of what you're proposing. A durable power of attorney covering what specifically?" Derek said, "Your assets, property, accounts, anything in your name, so that Pamela has the authority to act on your behalf if needed." I nodded slowly. "The property," I said. "The house?" "Yes," he said. "Investment accounts?" "Yes," he said. "Investment accounts?" "Yes." "Whatever you have. Anything else in my name?" "That's the idea," he said. "Comprehensive coverage." I looked at him for a moment. Then I looked at my daughter. Pamela was watching her hands in her lap. I said, Derek, I want to be straightforward with you because I think that's more respectful than anything else. I set down my coffee cup. There's nothing in my name. He looked at me. I'm sorry. My house is not titled in my name. My investment accounts are not in my name. My rental property is not in my name. Gerald set up a revocable living trust 20-some years ago. Everything we owned, everything I own, is held by that trust. I am the trustee. A durable power of attorney over my personal assets would cover essentially nothing of significance because there are essentially no significant assets in my personal name. The room was very quiet. I watched Derek's face do something complicated. The smile held for a moment, working on its own momentum, and then it simply stopped. Paul shifted in his seat. Pamela looked up from her hands. I said, I have an attorney who handles the trust. She's been managing the legal side of things for many years. If you'd like, I'm happy to have her call you and explain the structure. But I think you'll find that what you're proposing wouldn't accomplish what you're hoping it would. Derek said, carefully, we were just trying to help. I said, I know. I said it simply, without anger, because the thing is, and this took me a long time to understand, anger wasn't what I felt. What I felt was something closer to tired. Tired of pretending I didn't see. Tired of making myself smaller so other people could feel comfortable making moves. Tired of the soft performance of concern that was really just an audit. I said, I've been taking care of myself and this household for a long time. I took care of it with Gerald, and I've taken care of it since he's been gone. I don't need my affairs managed. What I need is for my family to trust that I'm capable of knowing my own mind. Pamela was crying quietly, not dramatically, just a few tears she kept trying to blink away. I looked at her and I said, Pamela, I love you, and I don't believe this was your idea. She didn't say anything, but the way she looked at her husband told me everything. They left 20 minutes later. Derek shook my hand at the door with a grip that had lost all its confidence. He said, we should talk more soon. I said we should. I did not mean it, and I believe he knew that. I closed the front door, stood there in my entry hall for a long moment, looked at the row of family photographs on the wall. Gerald at 35, Pamela at her college graduation, my mother in her garden the summer before she passed. Then I walked to the kitchen and I washed the coffee cups. That evening, Pamela called. Derek was not on the line. She said, Mom, I'm sorry. I said, I know you are. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he'd been talking about this for over a year. He made it sound like we'd be helping you. He made it sound like you needed it. I said, I know what it sounded like. She asked if I was angry with her. I thought about that honestly, and I said, I'm not angry. But I need you to understand something. This house, this trust, everything Gerald and I built, it belongs to the years we worked and the decisions we made and the life we lived. It's not an asset waiting to be managed. It's mine in every way that matters, and I will decide what happens to it, and when, and how. She said, I know that, Mom. I said, I need you to mean that. Not just right now, but going forward. She cried a little more. I let her. And then she said, I do mean it. I chose to believe her, not because I was naive, but because my daughter is not Derek, and I refused to lose her over something he started. We've talked more in the months since than we had in the year before. Real conversations, not inventories. She's been asking questions about Derek that I don't think she was letting herself ask before. I haven't pushed. That's not my place. But I've left the door open, and she's been walking through it more often. The house is still mine. The trust is intact. Margaret Chen sent me an updated summary of everything last month, neat and organized the way Gerald would have approved of. I still sit in his chair by the window in the evenings. I still pour one cup of coffee a little too strong. I still hear the house settle at night the way old houses do, making whatever sounds they need to make. I am 67 years old. I know what I own. I know what I own. And I have learned, fully and finally, that you do not owe anyone an accounting of your life's work just because they asked for one with a smile. Gerald used to say that the best protection you can give yourself is the kind the other person doesn't know you have. He was right. He was almost always right. I keep his photo on the mantel in the living room, right where he can see the front door. I think he saw what was coming before I did. I think that's why he built what he built. I'm grateful he did, and I'm grateful I was paying attention when it mattered most. I keep thinking about the moment Derek set that briefcase on my coffee table, the way he did it, unhurried, like a man who already knew how the afternoon was going to end. He had no idea. And I think that's the part that stays with me most. Not the confrontation, not the legal explanation, not even the look on his face when he understood that everything he'd come for was already protected. What stays with me is the simple fact that Gerald had done the right thing long before any of this was a possibility. He'd acted with integrity when there was nothing threatening him, nothing pushing him. He just believed it was the right way to live, to build something honest and protect it honestly. That's what I learned from 38 years with that man. You don't wait for trouble to show you who you are. You decide who you are first, and then you build accordingly. I wasn't always as clear-headed as I was that Tuesday morning. There was a version of me, years ago, who would have been devastated by what Pamela and Derek tried to do, who would have cried or argued or tried to convince them to be different people. I spent a long time in my 60s learning the difference between wisdom and naivety, learning that loving someone doesn't mean you have to be unprepared for them. Understanding that lesson cost me some peace of mind in the short term, but it gave me something more durable in return. When Derek asked about my assets, I didn't panic because I already knew the answer. I'd done the work. I'd had the hard conversations with my attorney. I'd read the documents. I'd understood what Gerald had built and why. That kind of clarity doesn't arrive by accident. You have to go looking for it, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means acknowledging that people you love might not always act in love toward you. And then there's the matter of staying quiet, not out of fear, not out of confusion, but out of deliberate patience, choosing to watch and wait rather than react. That took something I didn't always have. There were months when I wanted to say something, when a comment about the retirement brochure or a question about my finances made my chest go tight with the effort of staying still. But I held on to what my attorney told me. Let them show you their hand. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the decision to remain composed when everything in you wants to speak. That composure, practiced over a long marriage and a longer widowhood, is what made Tuesday morning possible. What happened to Derek's plan wasn't luck. A man who builds his life around taking what isn't his will eventually find himself in a room where that approach simply doesn't work. Not because the universe punishes anyone, I don't think in those terms, but because actions have the shape of their own intentions. He came in looking for a shortcut and found a locked door. Gerald put that door there. I kept the key. I think about Pamela. She's asking better questions now. I don't know what her marriage looks like from the inside, but I know that she's my daughter, and I raised her with enough of a foundation that she can find her way back to solid ground if she decides to. I'm not holding my breath and I'm not closing my heart. Both of those things are true at once. 67 years old, my house is still mine. My trust is intact, and I know, with the kind of certainty that only comes from having been tested, exactly what I am made of.